Welcome to another episode of the Bark Brigade podcast by Dogzilla Magazine. Today we will talk about important topic and offer you a guide to help all families that owns a dog or other pet. So I want you to imagine coming home after a really long, exhausting day.
Oh, I think we all know where this is going.
Right. You walk into your living room and there it is. Your absolute favorite couch cushion is just shredded to pieces. There's like foam everywhere.
A total disaster zone.
A complete disaster.
Yeah.
And sitting right in the middle of this mess is your dog. Their tail is tucked firmly between their legs, their head is bowed low, and they're giving you that, that classic, undeniably pathetic look of deep remorse.
The famous guilty look.
Exactly. And you think to yourself, oh, they know they messed up. They are definitely apologizing. But what if modern science just proved that your dog isn't feeling guilty at all?
Yeah, what if they're actually just terrified of you?
It's a harsh reality check. Today, we are tearing down pretty much everything you think you know about your best friend. Whether you're a lifelong dog parent navigating these daily struggles, or you're just insanely curious about animal psychology, you are going to want to hear this.
It's such a vital conversation for us to have.
Yeah.
Because honestly, the overarching theme we are unpacking today is a really tough pill for anyone who loves animals to swallow.
It really is.
We're looking at this massive convergence of brand new, incredibly rigorous behavioral and genetic data. And the undeniable conclusion is that even the most educated, devoted pet parents are operating on an everyday basis using, well, common sense that is scientifically entirely backwards.
Okay, let's unpack this, because calling the things we do backwards or, based on ghost stories is fascinating. And honestly, it's a little offensive to my ego.
I get that. It challenges everything.
Right, because I consider myself a pretty rational person. I read the training books. So why do smart people believe bad science, especially when it comes to the animals sleeping in our own beds?
Well, to really understand that, we have to look at how information, and specifically misinformation, actually propagates. We have this fascinating study from 2024 out of Spain, published in the journal Anthrozoos.
Okay, what did they look at?
They wanted to understand the human mechanics of belief, so they surveyed a massive cohort, 1,186 people across all these various demographics. And they found that over 50% of these respondents still operate under the absolute conviction that dogs inherently require a boss or an alpha.
Over half. In 2024, that is wild. I mean, are we just not paying attention?
It's not just about paying attention. The researchers actually dug into the demographics to figure out exactly why these specific myths are so incredibly sticky.
And what did they find?
They ran a regression analysis and found that age, pet ownership history, and ironically having an animal-related job actually explained about 34.5% of why people fall for and perpetuate these myths.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I understand this. You're saying that having a history of owning pets, or like even working in an animal-related job, makes you more likely to believe the bad science.
Surprising. Right.
That seems completely counterintuitive. Wouldn't experience make you wiser?
You would think so, yeah. But what that 34.5% variance actually reveals is the power of cultural momentum. It shows that our background, how we were raised around animals, the stories our parents told us about the childhood family dog, it cements these myths rather than dispels them.
Oh, I see. So if your grandfather trained his hunting dogs using dominance methods, you just absorb that.
Exactly. You loved and respected your grandfather, so you internalize those methods as truth. It becomes a family heirloom. Essentially, it's not about science anymore, it's about heritage.
That makes so much sense. It honestly reminds me of, well, outdated human parenting advice.
Oh, absolutely.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, the kind of unsolicited advice your great aunt gives you at a family reunion about how you need to be stricter with a toddler, or how letting a baby cry it out builds character.
Yes, the old wives' tales.
Right. It just gets passed down through generations without a single person ever stopping to ask, wait a minute, did an actual developmental pediatrician ever say this?
That is a perfect parallel. But we also have to recognize what is throwing gasoline on this fire today.
Yeah.
Because we are living in an era where the spread of information is dictated by algorithms, not peer review.
Oh, social media.
Social media plays a monstrous role in this. Think about the psychological mechanics of a viral video. Drama, conflict, loud, aggressive displays of dominance, those trigger high engagement.
They get the clicks.
They absolutely get the clicks. Meanwhile, methodical, nuanced, peer-reviewed science sits quietly behind a university paywall or, in a dry academic journal that the average person is never going to read.
It is so easy to fall into that trap. I mean, let's put you, the listener, in this exact scenario. It's a Tuesday night. You're exhausted from work, you have 5 minutes to kill, and you're scrolling TikTok or Instagram on your phone.
We've all been there.
Exactly. You swipe up, and suddenly you are looking at a highly produced video of a very confident, very charismatic dog trainer. The music is intense. The trainer physically pins a struggling dog down to the floor, stares it right in the eyes, and tells the camera with absolute unwavering certainty that wolves run your Labrador's mind.
And this video has 4 million likes.
4 million likes. The comments are full of people saying, wow, this saved my dog. So suddenly you find yourself believing it. The false belief jumps from the screen directly into your living room because it is packaged as highly effective entertainment.
And that's not just an anecdote, by the way.
Oh.
A January 2025 behavioral study completely confirmed this effect, showing that even highly educated owners who spare no expense on their dogs still cling to the remnants of this dominance theory.
So what does this all mean for us? Are we just incredibly gullible as a species?
Not gullible, no. But there is a deeper psychological layer here that we have to acknowledge. Why do we want to believe the guy on TikTok? I believe it comes down to a fundamental human need for psychological comfort.
Comfort. But dominance theory sounds so stressful. I mean, constantly fighting your dog for control.
It is stressful for the dog, sure. But for the human brain, it offers something incredibly seductive. A simple, logical, linear narrative. The human brain hates chaos.
We want things to make sense.
Right. We crave an equation where A leads predictably to B. When you are faced with the incredibly frustrating, messy, chaotic reality of a living, breathing, independent species cohabitating in your house, you want a rulebook. The alpha hierarchy provides a very tidy, simple story.
Right. So when my dog shreds the couch cushion, my brain desperately wants a story that makes sense of that chaotic mess.
Exactly. Telling yourself, he did this because he is trying to dominate me and assert his status in the pack, is an incredibly easy story to process. It gives you a clear antagonist and a clear path to victory.
Just assert your dominance back.
Right. That is far easier for the human ego to swallow than the actual scientific truth, which is, I completely failed to meet my dog's complex environmental, physical, and cognitive needs today, and they experienced a panic response.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a much harder pill to swallow, so we just project our own human narratives onto them.
We are highly prone to psychological projection. We have a very hard time accepting that an animal experiences the world differently than we do. So we take our complex human social structures, our human anxieties, our human grudges, and we just project them wholesale onto the dog.
And if we are projecting our own need for control and our own human narratives onto them, it makes you wonder what else we are projecting.
A lot, unfortunately.
What about our sense of right and wrong? Because this projection is incredibly obvious in the most famous dog behavior myth of all time. Let's talk about the guilty look, because you mentioned earlier they aren't actually feeling guilty.
We have to dismantle the guilty look because it is the cornerstone of so much misunderstanding. We're looking at a progression of studies from 2009 all the way up to fresh 2025 behavioral data that definitively prove that what we interpret as guilt is absolutely not remorse.
So what is it?
It is pure, unadulterated fear.
Man, I know some people are going to fight us on this. They will say, no, you don't understand. My dog knows what he did. I can see it in his eyes.
They always say that.
But the methodology researchers used to prove this is absolutely brilliant. Can you walk us through exactly how they tested this? Because it completely blew my mind.
Gladly. The researchers wanted to isolate the dog's internal knowledge of their own behavior from the human's reaction. So they set up a highly controlled experiment.
Okay, paint the picture for us.
They brought owners and their dogs into an observation room. The researchers placed a highly desirable forbidden treat right in the middle of the room. They instructed the owners to command their dog not to eat the treat, and then the owners were asked to leave the room.
Okay, so the dog is left alone with the ultimate temptation.
Exactly. Now, here is where the brilliance of the experimental design comes in. The researchers manipulated the scenario. In some cases, the dog ate the treat. In other cases, the dog obeyed and didn't eat it.
Good dogs.
Right. But when the owners were brought back into the room, the researchers lied to half of them.
I love this part so much.
They took owners whose dogs had been perfectly well behaved and told them, I'm sorry, your dog ate the forbidden treat the moment you left. And conversely, they told some owners whose dogs did eat the treat that their dogs had been perfect angels.
Let's really picture this. You have owners walking back into that room, fully believing their dog just committed a major crime, even though the dog sitting right there is completely 100% innocent.
Right. And the owners were instructed to scold their dogs based on the information the researchers provided. The findings were staggering, and they completely shattered the myth of canine guilt.
What did the dogs do?
The dogs who were scolded for a crime they absolutely didn't commit exhibited a significantly stronger, more exaggerated guilty look than the dogs who had actually eaten the treat but were greeted warmly by their misinformed owners.
Wow. Wait, really? If the dog who didn't do anything wrong is showing the most guilt, then the look has nothing to do with the crime.
Precisely. It completely flips the narrative. The physical expression we call guilt has absolutely zero to do with the dog possessing an internal moral compass or a memory of a wrongdoing. It has entirely to do with the dog reacting in real time to a tense human.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. When you walk in the door after work and you see that chewed-up shoe, what happens to your body? Your shoulders stiffen. You stop breathing for a second. Your eyes widen. Your jaw clenches. Maybe you let out a sharp sigh.
And the dog sees all of that instantly.
A dog's ability to read human microexpressions and body tension is just evolutionary magic. They can read the stiffness in your posture the millisecond you cross the threshold.
So they know we're mad before we even say a word.
Exactly. They immediately recognize, uh-oh, the giant primate who controls my food and my access to the outside world is suddenly very angry and unpredictable. So they offer appeasement behaviors.
Appeasement behaviors? Like what?
They shrink down, they tuck their tail to make themselves look smaller, they avoid direct eye contact to avoid challenging you. They are appeasing an immediate threat. They are not reflecting on a poor decision they made 3 hours ago.
I want to stop and really drill down into the mechanics of this. Why can't they reflect on what they did 3 hours ago? I mean, dogs have memory, they know where their food bowl is, they know who I am, so why can't they remember chewing the shoe?
This is a fantastic question, and it comes down to understanding the very specific limitations of canine cognition. Dogs absolutely have memory, what we call associative memory. They associate the sound of the leash with a walk.
Right, they get excited when I grab the leash.
But they lack episodic memory in the way humans possess it.
Yeah.
They do not mentally time travel back to specific events in the past and replay them like a movie. Because of this, animal cognition experts recognize a fundamental neurological principle. It's called the 1-second consequence rule.
The 1-second consequence rule. Explain how that wiring works in their brain.
For an animal's brain to successfully connect a specific consequence to a specific behavior, the consequence must arrive within roughly 1 second of the action. The neurobiology behind this involves the immediate release of dopamine or the immediate activation of the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center.
1 second. That is an incredibly tight window.
It is instantaneous. If the feedback is not immediate, the neural pathways simply do not link the two events.
Can you give us an analogy for that? Because it's hard to wrap my human brain around that kind of limitation.
Sure. Think about it like this. Imagine you are trying to learn a very complex foreign language. You are in a classroom, and you pronounce a word incorrectly at 9 a.m., but your teacher doesn't say anything. The class goes on.
Okay, tracking.
Then at noon, out of nowhere, the teacher walks up to your desk, slams a ruler down, yells at you in a language you barely understand, and points at your mouth.
Oh my gosh. I would be terrified. And I would have no idea which of the thousands of words I spoke that morning was the one that made the teacher so angry.
Exactly. You wouldn't learn how to pronounce the word correctly. You would only learn that your teacher is volatile, dangerous, and likely to explode without warning. And this is exactly what we do to our dogs.
Oh, that breaks my heart a little bit.
If your dog urinates on the rug at noon and you come home at 3 p.m., discover it, drag the dog over, point at the wet spot, and scold them, that consequence is entirely meaningless to the dog's understanding of their own bladder control.
They just think, wow, humans get incredibly aggressive whenever we stand near this particular rug.
Exactly. You pointing to a chewed shoe hours later does not teach them anything about house rules.
Oh.
It only teaches them that you are scary. And we have to heavily extrapolate what this means for the human-animal bond.
It can't be good.
It's not. When we continuously punish the past, when we scold them for things, their neurology literally prevents them from connecting to an action. We are heavily, systemically eroding their trust in us.
Because we were acting like that crazy, unpredictable language teacher.
Yes. We are teaching the dog only one thing, that the human is fundamentally unpredictable. And the paradox here is deeply tragic. By doing this, we dramatically raise the dog's baseline level of stress and cortisol.
And what happens to a dog with high baseline anxiety?
It usually leads to more anxiety-driven problem behaviors. They chew the couch cushion because they are anxious. They urinate inappropriately because they are stressed.
So by trying to enforce this moral lesson they physically cannot understand, we are actually pouring fuel on the fire. We are causing the exact behaviors we hate.
Precisely. A calm cleanup and a smarter prevention plan, like simply putting your shoes in the closet and making sure the dog has appropriate chew toys, will always, unequivocally beat a lecture your dog's brain simply cannot process.
That is so profound. And it makes me think, if our human biases are causing us to completely hallucinate guilt in a terrified dog, what else are we hallucinating?
We hallucinate a lot of things.
Right. Because if we are misjudging their moment-to-moment emotions that badly, how much are we misjudging their fundamental inherent personalities? We look at a pit bull and immediately see aggression. We look at a golden retriever and immediately see a gentle babysitter. Are we just projecting again?
That is the perfect transition because it leads us directly into what the modern data says about the illusion of breed labels.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. This is a massive focus for our deep dive today. We are looking at a landmark 2025 study published in the journal Science, and I want to emphasize the scale of this research because it is staggering.
It really is the gold standard of recent research.
They didn't just look at a dozen dogs. They analyzed the full DNA sequences of over 2,000 dogs. 2,000. And then they cross-referenced that genetic data with over 200,000 detailed owner surveys regarding behavior.
The sample size is unprecedented. It is robust, undeniable data.
And they dropped an absolute bombshell. According to the genetics, a dog's breed accounts for only about 9% of the behavioral differences between individual dogs. 9%.
It is a paradigm-shifting number. For over a century, we have painted canine breeds with a single, massive, broad brush. We confidently state Chihuahuas are inherently feisty and anxious, or Border Collies are always neurotic, or Golden Retrievers are universally perfect, bulletproof family dogs.
We all do it. I do it.
But the geneticists in this study forced us to look at the actual DNA. And in doing so, they established a crucial scientific distinction between what we call functional traits and personality traits.
Right. The researchers drew a very clear line in the sand there. Can you explain how they separate those in the genome?
Certainly. Functional traits, or motor patterns, are deeply hardwired into the genetic code. These are things like a beagle's biological urge to howl, a greyhound's impulse to chase a fast-moving object, or a pointer's instinct to freeze and lift a paw when it smells a bird.
Okay, so the physical actions?
Yes. When researchers look at the genome, they can see clear, breed-specific genetic markers for these physical motor sequences. They are tied to the dog's physical architecture and historical working purpose.
So if I get a husky, it's probably going to be vocal and want to pull things. That part is true.
Yes, exactly. But here is the critical pivot. Personality traits, things like general friendliness, sociability with strangers, baseline anxiety, or aggressive reactivity, those are governed by complex neurochemistry.
And what did the DNA show about those?
The 2025 study proved definitively that those personality traits do not belong to any single breed's DNA. There is no friendly gene exclusive to Labradors, and there is no aggressive gene exclusive to guard breeds.
The specific data point that just completely blew my mind was when the researchers compared Labrador retrievers directly with American Pit Bull Terriers.
Yes, that was a shocking comparison for a lot of people.
Labs have this culturally entrenched reputation as the ultimate gentle family giants. Pit bulls, on the other hand, are the most highly stigmatized, frequently banned, and feared dogs on the planet. Yet, when they looked at the genetic markers for behavior and the massive survey data, they found that labs and pit bulls scored equally high on human sociability.
Equally high, statistically indistinguishable when it comes to their inherent desire to connect warmly with human beings.
That's incredible.
That's one of the lead geneticists on the study explicitly stated. What the dog looks like on the outside is not going to tell you how the dog acts on the inside.
Think about the macro implications of this. Think about how this impacts the real world. You have breed-specific legislation banning certain dogs from entire cities, from military bases, from apartment complexes, simply because their head is a certain shape.
It's heartbreaking.
You have homeowners insurance policies denied because a dog's DNA happens to have a specific marker.
It is entirely unscientific discrimination based on a 9% sliver of their reality. And think about the animal shelter environment. How many amazing, perfectly suited, Highly sociable dogs are ignored and ultimately euthanized every single day because of the arbitrary label written on their kennel card.
Judging a dog's complex personality purely by its breed is literally the scientific equivalent of judging a human being's personality purely by their hair color. Imagine saying, oh, he has red hair, so he biologically must have a fiery, uncontrollable temper.
Right, we would call that completely absurd.
Yet we do it to dogs every single day, and we write laws based on it.
It highlights how desperately we cling to categories. We want the label to do the thinking for us.
There is a story from the research that beautifully illustrates this exact tragedy and the triumph when we overcome it. There was a family who arrived at an animal shelter, and they were dead set on adopting a golden retriever.
They had a specific vision in mind.
Exactly. They had read the blogs, they had seen the movies, and they believed a golden was the only genetically safe option for a family with a young child. They walked down the aisle of kennels and walked past a blocky-headed brindle pit bull mix named Olive 3 separate times.
3 times.
They didn't even stop to look at her because her label said pit mix. Finally, a seasoned shelter volunteer stepped into their path and gave them the greatest piece of advice. He said, watch the dog, not the sign.
Watch the dog, not the sign. That should be the golden rule of animal behavior.
Right. So begrudgingly, the family took a chance. They agreed to sit with Olive in a quiet meet-and-greet room, and the researchers noted that within 10 minutes, the supposedly terrifying, inherently dangerous breed mix had crawled onto the floor and rested her big, heavy head right in the lap of their 6-year-old child, gently thumping her tail.
That's a beautiful image.
Fast forward to today, and Olive sleeps under the quilt every night, sandwiched between that same 6-year-old and the family cat. It's a beautiful outcome, but it begs a massive question. If the genetic blueprint of breed only covers 9% of a dog's personality, what on earth is dictating the other 91%?
The answer is sitting right in our homes. It is the environment. We're looking at a classic case of nurture absolutely dominating nature. A dog's behavioral outcome is forged by epigenetics, environmental factors, their unique life history, the trauma they may have experienced, and the daily micro-interactions they have with you.
So we really need to focus on how the environment writes the software of the dog's brain.
Exactly. Let's look at the reality of the modern American pet dog. The vast majority are mixed breeds. A typical scruffy rescue mutt might have DNA from 12 different breeds swirling around in its genome.
12 different breeds? How do you even predict that?
You can't. It might have trace amounts of Chow Chow, a little bit of Poodle, some German Shepherd, and a dash of Chihuahua. Yeah. You cannot possibly predict how those genetic fragments will interact. But we know for a fact that its behavior is shaped by the consistency of its routine, the quality of its nutrition, its early socialization, and how safe it feels in its current environment.
It's like the anecdote of the rescue mutt that looks like a wiry terrier but lounges on the couch all day like a heavy bulldog and then tries to herd the children like a border collie when the doorbell rings. They just completely defy our categorical expectations when we give them the freedom to be individuals.
And we must talk about the very real physical danger of relying on breed labels as a crutch. It is a massive public safety issue.
A safety issue? How so?
Well, if you bring a golden retriever into your home, and you blindly trust the stereotype that Goldens are universally genetically safe with children, you will likely become complacent. You might let your toddler crawl over the dog while it's trying to sleep.
Oh, I see where this is going.
You might ignore very clear physical warning signs that this individual golden retriever is highly stressed, in pain, or uncomfortable. You trust the label, so you ignore the dog, and that is exactly when tragic bites happen.
But if you assume every dog is an individual capable of limits, you pay attention.
Precisely. If we strip away the breed labels, we free ourselves to actually notice the animal standing right in front of us.
Yeah.
You stop trusting the stereotype, and you are forced to start trusting your eyes, which means relying on the dog's actual real-time body language to tell you how they feel.
But unfortunately, according to the research, we get their body language wildly wrong, too.
We fail at it miserably. And this brings us to a phenomenon known as context blinding and our chronic misinterpretation of canine physical signals.
The biggest one, without a doubt, and the one that the Spanish survey found people still overwhelmingly misunderstand, is the wagging tail myth. Let's dismantle this right now. A wagging tail does not equal a happy dog.
The wagging tail is arguably the most misunderstood piece of nonverbal communication in the entire animal kingdom. Humans equate a wagging tail with a human smile. But in canine language, A wagging tail simply indicates one thing: arousal.
And what does arousal mean in this context?
It means the dog's nervous system is engaged. It means they are emotionally or physically stimulated.
And arousal is not necessarily a positive emotion.
Exactly. Arousal can tip into overarousal, anxiety, or explosive aggression in a fraction of a heartbeat.
The breakdown of the mechanics of the tail wag is fascinating. It is not just one movement, it is a complex vocabulary. For example, a high, fast, tight wag where the tail is vibrating almost like a metronome means high arousal, hyper-alertness, or active guarding.
Yes, that's a very tense wag.
Right. A low, slow, sweeping wag usually indicates uncertainty, appeasement, or a dog trying to diffuse tension. And a stiff, rigid flagpole tail that barely moves means the dog is on high alert and evaluating a threat. It is absolutely not an invitation to approach.
Every single veterinary behaviorist has a story about an owner who was severely bitten, who says in shock, but his tail was wagging. The dog was communicating immense stress, but the human only saw the wag.
Let me paint a scenario for the listener to really drive this home. You are walking your dog in the park. Up ahead, an off-leash chocolate lab starts trotting directly toward you. You look at it, and its tail is sweeping back and forth.
A classic setup.
Everything in your human primate brain screams, "Oh, look, a happy dog. He wants to say hi." You let your guard down, you reach your hand out, but as the dog closes the distance, it lets out a low, guttural growl that freezes the blood in your veins. You misread the high arousal as an invitation. But why do we do this? Why are we so bad at reading them?
A phenomenal 2025 study out of Arizona State University proves exactly why our brains fail us in these moments. The researchers investigated a psychological phenomenon called context blinding.
The methodology of this ASU study is pure genius. Walk us through what they did with Oliver.
The psychologists brought in a very expressive pointer beagle mix named Oliver. They set up high-definition cameras and filmed Oliver reacting to a variety of everyday triggers. They filmed him seeing a leash, encountering a loud vacuum cleaner, being offered a high-value treat, and being gently scolded. They captured all of his authentic facial expressions and body postures.
Okay, so they have all this great footage of a dog experiencing different emotions.
Yes. Then they brought in 900 human volunteers to watch the footage and identify what emotion Oliver was feeling. But here is the brilliant twist. Half the time, the volunteers watched the raw footage. They could see Oliver, and they could see the vacuum cleaner or the treat in the background.
Okay, that makes sense.
But for the other half of the viewings, the researchers used digital editing software to completely erase the background.
So the volunteers are just looking at a dog on a blank screen with zero environmental context.
Precisely. They could only see Oliver's face, the tension in his jaw, the position of his ears, and the whites of his eyes. The results completely exposed our human bias. When the background context was removed, the human volunteers completely fell apart. They couldn't tell a happy face from a fearful one. They were literally just guessing.
But when they could see the background, they were confident.
Confident, but relying on an evolutionary shortcut. When the volunteers saw the vacuum cleaner in the frame, they immediately assigned fear to the dog. When they saw the leash, they automatically assigned joy. They were not actually reading the physical micro-expressions of the dog. They were reading the room.
Wow. We just look at the room instead of the dog.
Professor Clive Wynne, who oversaw the research, called this our huge blind spot. We're paying far more attention to the human scene around the dog than to the biological signals the animal is desperately trying to give us.
And because we are blind to the actual dog, we miss the subtle stress signs right before things go wrong. Signs like a tense, closed mouth or a whale eye. Can you explain the whale eye?
Whale eye is a classic sign of canine distress. It occurs when a dog turns its head slightly away from a stressor, but keeps its eyeball fixed rigidly on the threat, exposing the white crescent of the sclera. It means, I want to look away, but I am too afraid to take my eyes off you.
Another one that shocked me is the stress yawn. If a dog is in a chaotic environment and suddenly lets out a huge, exaggerated yawn, they aren't tired. They're deeply stressed and trying to physically discharge anxiety.
Yes, and missing these subtle signs leads directly to danger, particularly when we talk about children interacting with dogs. This leads us to the highly controversial science regarding hugging.
Oh boy. I know you're going to make some people mad with this one.
Dr. Menor Campos and his veterinary behavior team have studied this extensively. We are primates. In primate evolutionary biology, wrapping our arms around another primate is the ultimate expression of safety, bonding, and love.
It's how we show affection.
But dogs are canids. In canid evolutionary biology, Having another animal place its limbs over your neck and restrict your movement is not an expression of love. It is an assertion of physical restraint, and it is highly threatening.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here. I know for a fact that someone listening to this deep dive right now is shouting at their dashboard, but wait, you are wrong. My dog loves being hugged. Every time I sit on the floor, he comes over and leans right into my chest.
It is the most common pushback we hear. And to address it, we have to establish a very clear behavioral difference between a dog actively seeking pressure versus a dog merely tolerating a human's embrace.
Let's break that down. What does a dog seeking pressure look like?
If a dog wants physical contact, they will initiate it. They will walk up to you, they will lean their heavy body weight into your leg, their muscles will feel like loose spaghetti, and their facial expression will be soft. That is consensual, sought-after contact. But what happens when a human initiates the hug? When a human suddenly wraps their arms tightly around a dog's neck, if you record it and watch it in slow motion, you will almost always see a sequence of stress signals.
The micro expressions we miss.
Exactly. You'll see the dog freeze, you'll see them do a quick flick of their tongue over their nose, you'll see their jaw snap tightly shut, and you will see the whale eye. The dog is not enjoying the hug, they are enduring it. They are tolerating the strange, restrictive behavior of their beloved primate because they have learned not to bite. But tolerance is not enjoyment.
And the tragic part is, canine experts universally point to hugging as one of the leading triggers for severe facial bites, especially involving young children. A toddler rushes up, traps the dog in an unwanted embrace, and the parents think it's adorable.
They think it's a photo op.
Right, they completely miss the stiff posture, the closed mouth, the whale eye. The dog telegraphs its intense discomfort as clearly as it possibly can, but the humans are context blind. They think hugs equal love, so they ignore the distress, and then the dog snaps.
And the parents always say, the bite came entirely out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere. The dog was screaming, but we didn't know how to listen.
It is profoundly humbling to realize how deeply flawed our perception is. We are relentlessly projecting our own human reality onto these animals. We hug them because we love hugs. We think they feel guilty because we feel guilty.
We do. And we even take it a step further. We attempt to project our incredibly complex human morality onto them.
Which brings us perfectly into the moral compass myth. I want to talk about this incredible study from Kyoto University involving 40 dogs. The researchers set out to test the deeply held romantic notion that dogs are excellent, intuitive judges of human character. You know the myth, the idea that dogs possess a sixth sense, a built-in lie detector that can sniff out a bad person?
It's a lovely thought, but the methodology of the Kyoto study completely dismantled it. They wanted to see if dogs would actually judge humans based on moral behavior. So they set up a stage. The dogs watched two strangers interact. The first stranger acted generously, they eagerly shared food with others, and behaved cooperatively.
And the second stranger?
The second stranger acted terribly. They were stingy, aggressive, and explicitly refused to share their food.
So the dogs are watching a clear display of good versus evil, essentially.
Correct. After the theatrical display, both strangers sat down, and the dogs were released and allowed to approach whoever they wanted. The results. The dogs showed absolutely zero consistent preference for the good, generous person.
My favorite detail from the research notes is that several of the dogs completely ignored both the good person and the bad person and simply walked over to a shady spot in the yard and lay down. It completely burst the bubble. They don't care about our moral failings.
They don't. They lack the neurological architecture in their prefrontal cortex to conceptualize human morality, justice, or fairness. They are primarily driven by an assessment of immediate safety, comfort, and the proximity of the next available resource.
But we so desperately want them to be these furry little moral judges. And this intense desire to impose human hierarchies and social constructs onto dogs leads us directly to the most toxic, damaging, and stubborn myth of all the alpha or pack leader mentality.
Dominance theory is the absolute darkest corner of canine misinformation. We brought up the MDPI 2025 La Trobe University survey earlier, the one with 224 participants. It highlighted a very disturbing trend.
What was the trend?
It showed that while modern dog owners generally want to align with science and use treats, the ghost of dominance very heavily lingers in the back of their minds. When push comes to shove, people still secretly believe they need to physically dominate their dog to earn respect.
Let's stop and look at the actual history of where dominance theory came from, because understanding the flawed science helps us let go of it. This all traces back to studies of wolves, right?
Yes, specifically the work of animal behaviorist Rudolf Schenkel in the 1940s. Schenkel observed wolves in captivity and noted fierce, bloody battles for dominance, leading to the concept of the alpha wolf.
But those weren't natural wolf packs, were they?
No, and that is the catastrophic flaw in the science. Schenkel was observing completely unrelated adult wolves from different regions, captured and forced to live together in a cramped, artificial zoo enclosure.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. They were highly stressed, terrified animals fighting over limited resources in a prison environment. Of course, they fought for dominance. It was essentially a canine gladiator arena.
But that has nothing to do with how wolves live in the wild.
Exactly. Decades later, scientists like L. David Mech went out into the wild and observed actual natural wolf packs. And they realized that a wild wolf pack is not a violent dictatorship. It is simply a family unit. It consists of a mother, a father, and their offspring from various years.
So they lead because they're the parents.
Right. The parents lead because they're the parents, not because they violently dominated the others. Mech himself spent the rest of his career trying to debunk the very alpha myth he had inadvertently helped popularize.
So we are basing our entire training philosophy on a debunked study of stressed-out zoo animals from 80 years ago.
Yes, and the modern scientific consensus is incredibly explicit about how dangerous this is. The University of Bristol and the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior, which is the absolute gold standard for veterinary science, have released position statements explicitly stating that dominant theory is not just outdated, it is a dangerous, counterproductive framework.
The sources outline the exact harm caused by these coercive methods. When you use alpha roles, physically pinning a dog on its back or intimidation or shouting, you are not teaching respect. You are triggering the dog's sympathetic nervous system. You are engaging their fight or flight response.
You are going to war with an animal that just wants to feel secure in its environment. And what happens when you terrify an animal? They either shut down and learn helplessness, or they defend themselves with a bite. Coercive methods drastically increase anxiety and spark defensive aggression.
I really want listeners to hear this and feel a sense of profound relief. Because the alpha myth puts so much pressure on the owner. You don't have to be a tough guy. You don't have to walk through doors first. You don't have to eat your dinner before your dog eats theirs to prove you're the boss. You can put down that adversarial burden.
It removes an immense, exhausting weight from the human-animal relationship.
I agree completely, but if I'm a pet parent who was raised on traditional methods, I have to ask the obvious question. If I'm not supposed to be the alpha and I can't use fear, how on earth do I get this 70-pound animal to listen to me when they are about to run into traffic?
That is where the incredible neurology of reward-based training comes in. And we have to be clear, positive reinforcement is not about simply bribing your dog with a piece of cheese. It is about actively rewiring their brain chemistry.
Walk us through that mechanism. What happens in the brain when we use rewards instead of punishment?
When you use punishment, you activate the amygdala, the fear center. The brain floods with cortisol, the learning centers shut down, and the dog acts purely on survival instinct. But when you use reward-based training, you engage the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for problem-solving, learning, and emotional regulation. You trigger the release of dopamine.
So they actually enjoy the learning process.
They thrive on it. You physically build new neural pathways that teach the dog to choose calm, cooperative behaviors over panic or reactivity. You teach them that cooperating with you leads to highly desirable outcomes. The empirical data is overwhelming. Dogs trained with positive reinforcement learn faster, retain the information significantly longer, and show a fraction of the behavioral stress of dogs trained with punishment.
So it's not just a nicer way to train, it is neurologically far more effective.
It is the only method supported by modern behavioral science.
If we let go of these adversarial myths, the guilt, the dominance, the genetic stereotypes, it clears our vision so much. It allows us to handle the practical, everyday realities of dog ownership much more safely. Let's pivot slightly and look at how modern science is rethinking health, socialization, and our deep connection with our dogs. I want to look at a classic piece of folk wisdom first, grass eating.
The famous grass-eating panic.
It is so funny to me how a simple, isolated anecdote like a dog eating grass and then throwing up once becomes permanent, unshakable folk wisdom that an entire culture just accepts. The myth is that if a dog eats grass, they must have a terrible stomachache, or they're instinctively trying to purge a toxin from their system.
It's a dramatic interpretation of a very mundane biological behavior. Modern veterinary research completely debunks the panic around this. Grass eating is a totally normal, evolutionary leftover behavior for canids.
So why do they do it?
Several reasons that have nothing to do with illness. They might eat it because they need a little extra roughage or fiber in their diet. They might eat it to settle a very mild, insignificant bit of gastric reflux. Or, honestly, they might just really like the taste and texture of fresh spring grass.
And the data shows that the dramatic conclusion, the vomiting, actually occurs in less than 25% of cases. The vast majority of the time, they eat it and go about their day. It does not automatically signal illness.
Exactly. It is a perfect example of how the human brain takes an isolated observation, assigns a linear narrative to it, and turns it into a hard and fast rule. But while the grass-eating myth is mostly harmless, there is another piece of traditional advice that is actively, dangerously destructive. And that is the myth surrounding puppy socialization.
Yes. The old traditional veterinary advice was clear. Keep your new puppy completely isolated indoors until they are fully vaccinated against parvo and distemper at roughly 16 weeks of age. Do not let their paws touch the ground outside.
From an infectious disease standpoint, that advice made logical sense decades ago. But from a neurological and behavioral standpoint, it is an absolute catastrophe.
Because of the developmental windows in the brain.
Exactly. The mammalian brain has very specific critical periods for development. For a puppy, the critical window for socialization, the period where their brain is physically capable of easily accepting new sights, sounds, humans, and environments as safe and normal, begins to rapidly close at 14 weeks of age.
14 weeks? That is 2 weeks before they even receive their final vaccinations.
Which creates a terrifying conflict for a new owner. But the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior has issued an unambiguous stance on this. Behavior problems, specifically aggression and severe fear reactivity, kill significantly more dogs under the age of 3 than infectious diseases do.
That's a sobering statistic.
It is. Euthanasia for behavioral issues is a massive epidemic. A puppy who misses that critical socialization window because they were isolated indoors often grows into a fearful, highly reactive, and potentially dangerous adult dog.
It is a compounding tragedy. You have these deeply loving, well-meaning owners who are trying to do the right thing. They are trying to protect their fragile puppy physically by keeping them locked indoors, but they are unintentionally crippling them psychologically. They are hardwiring lifelong fear into their dog's developing brain.
The modern, scientifically backed approach is curated, positive early exposure. It is vastly safer than isolation.
What does curated exposure look like? We aren't saying to drop an 8-week-old puppy into the middle of a filthy, chaotic dog park, right?
Absolutely not. That would be traumatizing. Curated exposure is highly controlled. It means carrying your puppy in a sling to an outdoor cafe so they can hear traffic and see strangers from a safe distance. It means having friends come over, take off their shoes, and hand the puppy tiny treats.
That sounds much more manageable.
It is. It means exposing them to quiet, respectful children under heavy supervision. It means taking car rides that end in a peaceful sniff walk in a clean, low-traffic area, rather than only ever taking them for car rides that end at the scary vet clinic.
You are essentially trying to introduce their developing brain to a vast catalog of experiences, teaching them that the world is weird, noisy, but ultimately kind and safe.
And that profound concept, teaching them that they are safe, brings us to the culmination of all this research. We have spent this deep dive tearing down the myths. We have dismantled the guilty look. We've proven dominance theory is toxic. We've exposed the illusion of breed stereotypes. And we've corrected our dangerous misreading of body language. What do we replace all of that with?
Right. If I strip away all my old habits, what is the new framework? The research culminates in a very practical, beautifully simple, actionable takeaway, a new way forward, and it's called the 5-minute daily observation ritual.
This ritual is the ultimate antidote to the outdated control and command mindset we have been dismantling today. It sounds deceptively simple, but neurologically it is profound. The ritual is this: tonight, when the house is quiet, just sit on the floor.
Sit there.
Just sit there. Have no food in your hands. Do not hold a toy. Have absolutely zero agenda and zero training goals in your mind. Just breathe, let your shoulders drop, and observe the animal sharing your living space.
It sounds almost like a form of mindfulness or meditation.
It essentially is. But it serves a very specific, scientifically grounded behavioral purpose. It trains the human brain to stop projecting and start perceiving. When you aren't trying to force an interaction or command a behavior or project a narrative, you actually start to see the truth of the animal in front of you.
Because you are finally quiet enough to notice the microsignals we talked about earlier.
Yes. You notice the subtle tension in their jaw when a truck drives by outside. You notice the tiny nose lick that indicates they're feeling a bit overwhelmed and need some space. You notice the way they shift their weight. And most importantly, you notice the soft, slow blink that indicates they feel completely secure and trust you implicitly.
Tonight, listener, I challenge you to try this. Just sit on your living room floor. Watch your dog's ears. Watch the rhythmic rise and fall of their ribs as they breathe. Listen for the long, heavy sigh they let out when they finally settle down and rest their chin on their paws. True understanding doesn't happen when you are shouting commands. True understanding whispers in the silence.
We have to remember the incredible evolutionary journey of this species. Dogs have evolved alongside human beings for tens of thousands of years. Their biology, their neurochemistry, and their social structures are exquisitely attuned to ours. But the deepest, most unbreakable bonds are not formed in intense, shouty obedience boot camps. And they certainly are not formed by pinning a frightened animal to the ground in a misguided attempt to be an alpha.
No, they're formed in quiet moments.
They are formed in quiet, shared presence. Moments where the dog looks at you and realizes, perhaps for the very first time, that they don't need to appease you, they don't need to perform for you, and they don't need to fear you. They realize that they are truly safe and that they are actually being heard.
It changes everything about the relationship. When you stop projecting your own human stories onto them and just let them be dogs, it feels like a massive weight is lifted.
It really does. It frees both of you to simply exist together.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to ponder. We have spent this entire hour discussing how intensely we project our own human narratives onto our pets. We completely miss the actual physical truth of the dogs we live with every single day because we are so blinded by our own context, our own egos, and our own assumptions. So if we are that blind to the beings sleeping at the foot of our beds, what subtle, silent signals are we missing from the humans in our lives? When your partner sighs or your child turns away, are you reading their actual emotion or are you just projecting your own narrative onto them? Maybe practicing quiet observation with your dog, sitting on the floor and just watching without an agenda or a need to control is actually the very first step to becoming a much better, more empathetic listener to the people around you too.
That is a very powerful thought to leave on.
Thank you for listening, dear Brigadiers. And if you have any questions, visit the source article on Dogazilla magazine at dogazilla.com. That was all for this episode, and until the next time, bye to all listeners of the Bark Brigade podcast.